been waiting for this moment since 2014. The making of our programs starts with a big, roomy idea that Rosie, David, and I find worthy of a season's exploration. We cast a wide net for presenters, winnowing until we find that hand-in-glove fit of person and idea, how that person, in the specifics of his or her work, will crack open the big idea, giving us an experience, a way in, to find something we've not yet seen, heard, or thought. Why we make things is our big idea for now, as Rosie said. And I'm going to mention it too. Baron Wurmser's memoir, The Road Washes Out in Spring, is the story of his 20 years living off the grid, an amalgam of related makings, shelter and poetry, family and gardens, in the turbulent cultural moment of 1970s America. I've read it 4 times. The hand slipped into the glove. Today's exploration is precisely where Baron's work belongs at our park. Today's moment is also a tribute to a boundary-pushing thinker, writer, teacher, mentor, and friend. I've worked with Baron for over a decade and still do. Many of you can say the same. Baron, we all welcome you and thank you for the gifts of your keen mind and generous heart. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you so much, Sarah. Thank you, Rosie. Thank you all for coming out this afternoon to this magical spot. I'm going to first read a couple pages that I wrote particularly for this event, and then I'm going to read some from this recent novel. So I'm going to begin with a couple pages. In my most recent books, Legends of the Slow Explosion and Songs from a Voice, I have been intent on exploring the terrain of imagination, where it comes from, how it manages and doesn't manage in this world, what it has to tell us. As the first title indicates, I am interested in the legendary, that which is somehow larger than life, deeper than life, and cannot be defined by a series of facts or explanations. In a world beset each hour and day by endless news, a constant pounding of events and people deemed of interest, and in a world beset by endless entertainments of various degrees of mindlessness, the legendary may seem like a remnant of a more credulous era. Yet lives and events, particularly as far as the making of art is concerned, can portend much more than a summary. A look around us at these fields very much tells us that. Life as we live it, to put it grandly, is made up. We are born into the world of time and circumstance, and who we are varies wildly according to local conditions. We are mortal creatures with appetites, but everything else concerning how we go about our days, our food, our transport, our work, our feelings, how we use our knowledge and what we consider knowledge is imagined. What may strike anyone is how little we talk about imagination. Perhaps we feel it goes without saying, or perhaps we don't believe in it, or perhaps it seems frivolous, or perhaps it doesn't seem to matter. Things are what they are, even if we made them up. Yet imagination and its close relation, inspiration, are the well springs of our feeling that we are alive, not merely as functioning creatures who drive cars, turn on computers, and cash paychecks, but creatures who have something limitless inside us, something that is attuned to the feeling of love, something inexpressible, something aligned with the silence of sculpture and the sounds that are music, something that we could participate in and be touched by, something that in its quiet, persistent way makes life worth living. I am making large claims, but if you consider the opposite of the two matters I have raised, if you look at the unimaginative and the uninspired, they aren't happy states of being. They speak of the dreary and humdrum, of gray days and anonymous buildings. They speak of being unappreciative, of going through the motions, of not allowing for joy, for not registering the remarkable thrill of being. For it is this thrill that fuels imagination and makes imagination a vehicle of praise to the end, as the poet Theodore Retke once put it. We can and do imagine very terrible things. There is something chillingly neutral in imagination as a quality. Like water, it can go anywhere. I take civilization, to introduce a large but important word, to be a sort of tutoring of the imagination in ways that are fruitful, empathetic, and truth-telling. To say that civilization fails frequently in this endeavor goes without saying. It's understandable that one might give up on imagination and inspiration and shrug one's shoulders with resignation and irony at what a friend of mine likes to call ABI, another bad idea. There certainly has been no shortage of them in human annals. The justifications for various forms of evil, slavery, bondage, mass murder have never been lacking. Such social forms subsume individuals as if a person were merely part of a mass identity, not an individual life. What is precious about individual imagination, and about which we cannot remind ourselves enough, is that the imagination can nurture our feelings of belonging in this world. That the imagination can literally refresh us, make us fresh in a world that inevitably wears us down with routines and habits. When we speak of the creative, we need to recall the word in all its actuality, the sense of life as a perpetual springtime. Surely that is a marvel of the human spirit, its ability to conjure in countless ways entities that have the savor of springtime, that are fresh. And again, all you have to do is walk around here and you know what I'm talking about. How this all happens is mysterious, and despite the labors of neuroscientists, will remain mysterious. Inevitably, explanations of imagination are reductive, perhaps handy to make people feel less ill at ease, but at a loss when it comes to how something occurs from seemingly nothing. In my most recent book, the full title of which I will now inflict on you, Songs from a Voice, being the recollections, stanzas, and observations of Abe Runyon, songwriter and performer. Yes, I always wanted to write a book with a ridiculously long title. My main character, Abe Runyon, comes from an American nowhere. a small town out on the northern plains. He grows up in a modest house and goes to schools that don't do much for him. He notes the world around him, and he sees there is much more to it than meets the eye. Yet there is a thick covering of steady cliché that covers everything, and a custom dust that at once makes life tolerable and that smothers life. My character is based on Robert Zimmerman, the artist who renamed himself Bob Dylan, and who has been notoriously uninterested in explaining anything. More power to him. My book is an evocation and a speculation, to quote a British reviewer. What attracted me is, of course, the sense of the legendary. How did this enormous welter of song come from such seemingly unremarkable circumstances? Society is all about the hubbub of the right school and the right job and the right neighborhood and the right car. And here is a story that isn't about anything like that, that is about someone who simply follows his nose and makes it up, someone who is indifferent to what is right, who trusted imagination and inspiration. The issue of trust is enormous. It is very easy, given all the voices telling a young man such as Abe to not believe in himself, to not trust, to follow the approved script rather than toss the script aside and make up his own. Plenty of adults can tell you and are glad to tell you that you can trust and still fail ingloriously. There are no guarantees about how the world at large will receive you. Indeed, a degree of indifference, as in, who are you and what are your credentials, can be counted on. The world can seem a conspiracy of failed longings and hopeless aspirations. Many an adult voice bears traces of a very weary wisdom. Yet every day the boat of inspiration is launched in countless ways. The world of what others have created is deeply provoking, as you can see right here at Cold Hollow. The world in and of itself is deeply provoking, even when it is manifestly unhappy. The forces of clarity and confusion never tire. Any given moment offers more than a mere human mind can ever encompass. Yet the varied lightning of illumination remains. A sculpture, a song, a poem, a painting, a dance, any instance of embodiment, of making something that wasn't there before. My intent now is to read from Songs from a Voice, and introduce you to Abe and what he has to say about being Abe and many other matters. He is the one who imagines and who makes. That is his legend.
Well done.
Thank you. So now I'm going to read a bit from this book, and I'm going to read, to begin with, from the beginning of this book. I was well into this book, and it was going okay, but I realized I did not have a beginning for the book. I didn't know where to begin it, because it's not. I mean, the book kind of proceeds chronologically, but the book's about what I was just talking about. It's about imagination. And so just to say, Abe was born such and such wasn't going to cut it. And the way these things often work, which I'm sure a number of people who are sitting here could testify, because I know there are a lot of people here who are creative people, is that the door opened to me through the world of rhyme. Because my character he's a rhymer, he's a songwriter, he loves rhyme and he makes up rhymes, and I have little poems in the book that are rhyming poems. So that sort of gave me the impetus, and you'll hear what happened. So I wrote a couple pages of kind of hip hop prose that is portrays what you will hear, which is a vision. I met a snake one day while I was walking home from school. I was hiding out under the usual bushel basket of doubt, wondering where my way was, lost in proud clouds I couldn't tell anyone about, when this snake crossed my path, then stopped and said, "You heard of me, Abe, from various hustles I've run, and how the human race got undone, and some of that's true and some's not, but I get around town and now I'm down with you." Nothing, no one under the ever sun was going to upstart me. No freak out on my part. I was too out of it to drop my heart because a snake started talking. I lived in could be already. Well, whatever you've got to say to me, I've heard it already. I may be a kid, but I'm a mighty yid. I can rant and gallivant. Enough, said the snake. I get that you are big on yourself, which is nothing new with your kind, blind human mind, groping and hoping, and as they say these self-pleased days, coping. No need to lay your trip and shtick on me. I was winding around the bower and making people cower before you ever descended from your intellectual tower. My abode is the crossroad where the soul gets sold. Here the snake rose up a bit as if to strike. Don't worry, Abe. I'm not going to hurt you the way you think I might. I've got better griefs to inflict, ones that make you sick when you feel well, ones that get under your skin so your flesh feels like it's within and your thoughts peel off you. I didn't like the sound of that and said I had to go. I was up for anything, but not everything. Not so fast, hombre, the snake declared. I came along to make you aware. If that scares you, then you'll never share what's in you with others. You'll just mutter and stutter and hang your head like you were already dead, like a lot of the human disgrace. The snake eyed me. Don't think about doing something violent. That would be stupid. If you pick up a rock, you're even more doomed. You'll be stuck for life in your low hope room, your head an angry tomb. What kind of time could I have stalled for? And I had to admit, he made me curious. I like things to happen that I couldn't tell anyone about, that made me feel special, but that made me feel secret too, like I was invisible in public, like no one could ever guess me or suggest to me or wrongheadedly bless me. Still, this character had danger emblazoned all over him. He was bound to know more than I did. Didn't he invent sin? What if I offered you a deal, the snake asked. His voice was a seductive hiss, like he knew he couldn't miss. An ancient carny, he knew an easy mark. No deals, I said. With me, it's all or nothing. I don't want your sympathy or your reparation treaty or your drizzle of metaphysical iced tea. Do I make myself clear? I expect this, Falderall. Goes with my job. You deal with humankind, and you're going to get a lot of their fast-talking rot. Words are a big conceit. People in their verbal steeples don't grasp how the other creatures know something too. No offense meant that you weren't born a wren or a snake or a horse. You mean I didn't come here to duel with a fool. I've noticed your tendency to inner photography. You're going to need sustenance, not snake meat, but something more complete. Riddles get me down, man. Could you come out straight and say it? I've got a guitar, 6 strings that ping, ring, and sing. I started to feel lost. My head started to swim, like I didn't know where to end or begin, like I was living in something that couldn't happen but did. My tongue felt tossed, my eyes crossed. I wasn't going to cry. I was never going to cry. But I thought of my grandma and how she sighed, how her sad ocean leaked out. And I knew what that was about, even though I hadn't seen where she'd been. Everyone has a guitar, kid. They sing what's already been sung. They inhabit the days and offer their out-of-tune praise. But there's more to be felt and voiced. Why do you care? My wits were coming back. I could see through the crack in the sky inside me. Fairy tales don't come true, Abe. I know that better than anyone. But old stories have and do. You're one of the old ones yourself, walking down the street, heading home from school, wondering and mooning and tuning the universe in your head. What could be, should be, would be, a real circus upstairs. Who cares? It came out more desperate than Flip. Got a ciggy? Snakes don't smoke, don't tell bad jokes, and don't unnecessarily emote. Here's the upshot, kid. You're going to have a chance, but you can't trust anyone. You're going to be on your own. What you're seeing right now is a vision, and that's going to be who you are. And how can you, Mr. Snake Vision, tell me who I am? I pulled out a Marlboro, waved it in the sonic air. I'm impossible and improbable, Abe. That means you're done for but unaccounted for. Good luck in the dream world. He didn't disappear because he was never there. I made stuff up routinely, or stuff made me up. Abe walked home from school, his head flaky, snaky, unwide awake, full of the mistaken and half-baked, but cocky nonetheless. Like he had the inside track on some strange success, like he knew something no one else knew, like what he thought was true. Thank you. I'm going to read a little more from the book. The book is in short chapters, three or so pages. And it goes all over the place in terms of Abe's background. So I'm going to read one about where Abe comes from, which is a small town out in the northern plains of the United States. Before and after each chapter in the book, there's a 4-line poem. I wanted to try to indicate that my character was, a lyricist, wrote lyrics, and I wanted to break up the prose. So I'm going to read the poem, and then I'll read this section. When the rundown clock comes for you, son, you'd better be ready. The sun won't wait, the boss won't stop. Your faith can't be too steady. Small towns are filled with characters. The human comedy that has been around forever. I wanted to be a character myself. Some people say I am, but I don't know how my type would be defined. Recluse who appears on stages. Poet who is not what the college crowd calls a poet. Regular cryptic guy. Not that it matters. You do what you do. In our town, there were, among others, the philosopher, the minister, the drunkard, the card cheat, the loose woman, the braggart. Each one was a distinct person. The minister, for instance, had a limp, as if maybe God had struck him at some point. But they were also categorical. The person's name got folded and tucked inside. Each one of them could have walked out from the pages of a tale. Each one had a moral to impart. None of them was interested in changing, more the opposite. Their ways may have taken them down the way it happened with the drunkard, but the ways were their ways. Pride cuts in different directions. Where you grow up, Somethingsville, Minnesota, is your universe. You're trying to figure out what your place is in it and what the planets are. I heard about these people from my parents and from other kids. I'd see them on the streets. Later, when I was in high school, I met some of them in the local pool hall where they used to hang out. There were pool halls in most towns back then. There was time for people to seemingly do nothing. People said the philosopher came from a rich family and didn't have to work. I'd see him in the library, hunched over a book, his lips moving with the words. Whenever he looked up, he seemed startled. How could he hold all his thoughts? The minister didn't have a congregation but carried the Bible around. You'd see him stop someone on the street, open the Bible, and start spouting, animated like. He'd stop my mother. Somehow she seemed more amenable as a Jew than my father. He was polite to everyone. "Nice day, Mrs. Starker," he'd say. Rain or snow, the weather didn't matter. That's what he would say. Nice day. He didn't live in the world the way other people lived in the world. He had a role in a larger play, the story of feeling and retribution. When I was a tyke looking up at him, I could see a small blaze in his clear blue eyes. The others I mentioned hung especially around the pool hall. For a time, I must have been 15. I spent many afternoons there. I didn't care for pool because I didn't like being watched and I didn't like competing. I did like the atmosphere. Time hung in the air like dust. The place smelled of old sweat, whiskey, and tobacco. It was a man's place, but the loose woman seemed at home. She never shot a game, but she'd sit on a chair and hold court. Her name was Ray, and she and the man would joke with one another. She wasn't old, but she wasn't young. She teased me about what I'd been up to, which hadn't been much, though I puffed myself up as best I could. She liked to banter. I was torn up because the word was she would go to bed with a guy in high school, a real woman, not a girl who would go to bed with a high school guy. That was a dream coming true. She'd smile at me while I stammered and blushed. I could feel the men in the hall winking at her. I wanted her bad. I felt, though, a melancholy about her. She wasn't a regular mom, a housewife, or a teacher or secretary. Her life was in some other place where women weren't supposed to be. But there she was. I felt sorry for her. That was silly, because who was I to feel sorry for a grown woman leading her own life? Why was I sensitive to something that probably wasn't there? Why couldn't I be like other guys and tease her back and touch her and make the right insinuations? Why couldn't I turn my head and wink at the other men? It's tempting to put more on to people the sums of their broken obligations that deserves to be put on. I've been doing that my whole life. That's one place the songs come from, putting on more. It comes from a craving in me for more feeling than the workaday world allows, but that songs do allow. In songs, you could wallow and aggravate at the same time, and that was the pool hall, an idle yet tenacious song. I never spoke a word to these characters, but they were precious figures in the world of my head. They were my fellows. They hailed from somewhere else than the regular people who had regular jobs. They might have been forlorn or not, but they had that jolt of complicity that woke me from my half-formed dreams. Hopeless, my dad would say about someone like the card cheat, well known as a practical joker and often arrested thief. Maybe he was hopeless, but that seemed a badge of some kind of honor. To be hopeless meant you had fallen and you didn't care about getting up. All the ongoing talk was just talk, stuff people read in the newspaper or heard on the radio or watched on TV and made a passing fuss about, news that didn't concern you. I like that, being unto yourself, never improving, not caring what other people thought. I didn't understand the pain in them, but pain was not the total of them. You better watch out what you pity. Any of those people could have told me a thing or two. Living each stubborn day, they did. So that's about where Abe came from. I'm just going to read you a little bit more. Where does Abe go? Of course, where he goes is where? New York town, New York City. So I'll read a little about that, and then we'll do some question and answer, and then we'll drink seltzer or whatever we're going to do. Love stood in the doorway watching. I held my partial breath. The moment skittered, marbles on ice, like time denying death. When I first came to New York City, I lived here and there, sleeping on couches, sometimes on the floor with my overcoat as a blanket in bed. In their offhand ways, people were open and welcoming. The city, or at least downtown, was still soft, not overrun by money and bustle, not so full of itself, not corporate, but still personal. People living their disorganized, life-size lives. People like me came to the city as seekers, people without a career in any regular sense. What I wanted to do wasn't taught in any college or sold by any company. I needed to be among like-minded people who could listen, people I could share my love of music with, people I could learn from. I knew about the people playing in Washington Square. I knew about the clubs where you played for tips. Folk music was made up, but the scene was real. If I was going to get noticed, New York was the place. There was more to it than getting noticed. There was my starting to grow up, starting to realize how much more there was to the world than the town I grew up in. I knew that. That's why I left. But that's not the same thing as living it. By a couple of months in Chicago, where I stayed with a guy who knew a guy from my town, was a way station on the road to New York, a sort of catching my breath before moving on. Chicago belonged to the Midwest, the ocean of land. New York was the East, older and more settled and more aware, but also a little planet that spun on its own axis. Greenwich Village had been attracting people from elsewhere for decades. I didn't know all the stories about those people, but I knew history lay under my boot heels when I first started walking around, looking at the brick buildings, climbing 5 flights of stairs, and finding my way among the crazy quilt of the downtown streets. I wouldn't admit it because I was too occupied trying to be cool to admit anything. But I was thrilled. I could have sent a postcard home, but didn't. Meeting people was crazy. Everyone was like a dog sniffing another dog. Who are you? I veered between sincerity and distance. I wanted to meet everyone and take in everything. I wanted to make people know who I was when I didn't know myself who I was. I wanted to make my mark, but I had no idea what my mark might be. I was there, though, walking the sidewalks and telling people if they wanted to know what a cold winter was, they should check out northern Minnesota. I felt someone was calling my name, even as I was losing my name. I looked at people looking at me. No more time in front of mirrors. That was for preparing. That was the past. In New York, I was on the stage, and I better act that way. Thank you.
Thank you, Baron.
You're welcome. Has Bob Dylan read this book? No. That's one question done with.
Did I see a hand over there? I was curious when you said the relationship between imagination, you talked about the between imagination and inspiration. And since that's, I mean, of course, I go for the easy bait since that's the theme of our season. How do they work together for you?
Well, inspiration, is a funny thing because obviously it is. It has a magical quality. I mean, if you're a writer, there is something out there called the muse, and it's not something you could dial up. It comes and goes. On the other hand, there's a kind of inspiration that you could derive, which I think affects everybody who comes to this place, where you're with other people's work, basically, and that inspires you. And one way or another, you can do that every day of your life, basically, in terms of you're not going to be a cold hollow every day, but you can certainly read something, you can listen to something, you could see something, and that inspiration. Obviously, to me, that inspiration then it feeds imagination. How that happens is why I wrote this book, basically, in terms of, and of course, there is no explaining it. Basically, it's more like a web, something like that. It's definitely not a this leads to that sort of thing. But to me, that's how those two things go together.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I appreciate that. Yes.
Bob Dylan has written 600 songs, many of which people don't know. My son is a great admirer of Bob Dylan who knows some of those songs. And by coincidence, Franz Schubert wrote 600 songs. He died at the age of 31. So imagination must have been something that was his constant companion, it seems to me, to achieve that, not only the symphonies, but the songs at that early age.
Okay, yeah. It just so turns out that I spent a part of the winter listening to Schubert piano sonatas. So I hear you. I hear you, brother. And you're right. There are certain people who, just have this access, I guess is a word, to creativity. And, that's what we can say. Because obviously, Dylan's output is staggering, Schubert's output is staggering. And a lot of it is obviously of extremely high quality, too. It's not just a lot of stuff, So every now and then someone comes down the highway and, they're like that. But I like putting those two together. I don't think Schubert has appeared in any Bob Dylan songs, but I'll have to think about that.
You have a question in the back.
You're going to have to hear this, Rosie.
I'm about halfway through your book, and immediately what struck me in a sense was that it's an imagination about an imagination. I don't know, for some reason that struck me. And what I come to with that, in a sense, is how imagination, or the individual imagination, comes from imagination, and that somehow there's an interchange between the two. I mean, that's a bit of a romantic notion, but you know, the individual imagination comes from some greater imagination.
Did you hear? So he's about halfway through your book, and correct me, make sure I say this correctly.
I got all your hand gestures. That was cool.
Seems that it's an imagination about an imagination, right? It is a sort of double-folded thing, and that there's individual imaginations often inspired by a much larger scope, pervasive imagination. Is that sort of accurately? There's a relationship. And was there something you, like, just...
Not a question exactly, more of an appreciation of his book.
Yeah. Is it more of an appreciation, not so much a question, but an appreciation of that relationship between your imagination being inspired by sort of that web, but sort of almost like a, sounds almost like a mirror, a hall of mirrors of imagination, inspiring and reflecting back on one another, and then the id imagination, that big one. So just really, I think it was...
Well, really, I mean, that's a little more than I would say.
It's an imagination of an imagination.
Yeah.
Of Dylan's imagination.
Somehow between the two, it relates to imagination, period. Just,
Yeah.
you know, with a capital I.
The two, your imagination of Dylan's imagination, relates to imagination with a capital I.
Yeah. Yeah. Whole lot of imagination. Yeah.
Yes, please.
I think I have Baron, I think I have a related question, and I'm pondering the embodiment of making, right? And so when you talk about imagination, just say a little bit more about that, because it seems like in taking in Schubert, just as other creative sorts, either are visited by the muse or sit with others' works, there's this embodiment in the making of whatever art they're making that almost then feeds into their work and makes it
Yeah.
more.
Yeah. Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. It makes good sense.
Talked about embodiment,
Yeah.
right? And that's
Yeah, that word that this is a former student and friend of mine, Elner, used, embodiment. I think is a really great word, and I think it's a great word for us being here today with these sculptures, because obviously sculpture is such a powerful act of embodiment, right? And you know, I know as a writer, you know, writers often use the word description. That's a word writers use a lot, like describe something. And I've never been real enthusiastic about that word, honestly, because to me, writing is an act of embodiment. And that's probably, for me, because I'm coming from poetry. And poetry is based in what? Rhythm and sound. That's the basis of poetry. So, which is embodiment, right? And so I think instinctively, there is that reach for, yearning for, deep feeling for physicality, basically. And that without that physicality, nothing could happen, basically. And so in different ways, different arts, obviously some are palpable, like sculpture and dance are two that are very palpable, you know. It can start to feel a little remote in the world of prose, for instance, okay, prose writing. Okay, poetry, pretty embodied that way, so yeah. Makes sense? Okay, good question.
My question is related to that. This book is formatted as prose, but to me it was poetry. So could you talk about that a little bit more, the boundaries?
The other question is about prose and poetry, and I guess the simplest way to put it is that my natural language is poetry, basically. So it took me decades to learn to sort of write prose, you know, because I have that kind of mind that, you know, focuses on sound and rhythm and also associative images too. And so prose logic, you know, Sally opened the door, Sally closed the door, Sally went down the street. You know, that's not how I think exactly. So it took a while to sort of get with it with prose that way. You know, and I mean, I agree with you. I consider each one of those chapters a poem, and that's how I approach those chapters. So they have that sense of beginning, middle, and end that to me comes from poems. You know, but not everybody sees it that way.
Yeah, in the back? Yes, you.
When I read about you coming and I figured out what the theme of the day was going to be, specifically Bob Dylan, a lifetime hero, I got out some archival Dylan just to get myself psyched for the visit.
Hold on one sec. He listened to archival Dylan to get psyched for the visit. He's a longtime fan of Dylan's.
He was playing live. It was a bootleg album, and the crowd was all with him, but he was still very new. And he stopped the song. He was going to start the next one, and he clearly had forgotten the words to get him started. And he vamped a little on the guitar, and then he bantered a bit, and then finally he said, "Well, it's a good thing I've got my Bob Dylan mask on." And I wonder if it resonates with you that as it did with me, the mask was bravado and confidence, but when he made a mistake, he was glad it was there because you can't see me.
Did you hear that?
Not all of it.
So he was listening to a recording
Right.
of Bob Dylan playing, and the audience was with him, and Bob Dylan forgot the words. And
Right.
he covered it for a while, and then he ended up saying, "I'm really glad I have the Bob Dylan mask on today," meaning that, and he was curious what your response to that was in terms of the performative nature, having the mask so you can't see what's actually going on back there.
Yeah. Yeah. That was an impetus to, in part, to write the book, basically, in terms of the persona of the person, which is a creation. I mean, you know, people often make this one-to-one association with you as an artist. When you create something, you write something, and people will say to you, you know, well, that's how it happened, right? You know, because they really, I guess they're afraid of imagination, basically. I don't know how else to put it, you know, in terms of, you know, the truth that the persona is offering you is not, you know, something that can get written down factually in an encyclopedia. It's what I call basically emotional truth. That's what I call it, okay? So I think the reason people keep listening to those songs and that those songs did things to people is that he walked into this vista of a kind of emotional truth that I don't think anybody had walked into before. And that's not to slight other people. It's just to say he found this place into it, which I think one way or another is what each artist is looking to do, to me, in terms of finding that, you know. And so the persona, I think, helps in that way because it gives you an imaginative space, basically. Because, you know, part of what my book is about is the ordeal of school, you know? You know, which to me is just, it's a wonder there are any artists given what schools are like, you know? Because they're just like pounding you daily, you know? Raise your hand, what's your name, you know, that's school, you know? And you're in this other place, you know, and you want to live in this other place. You know, I was just talking with my wife last night about going to see movies when you're 13 years old. We were watching this movie from 1957 with Cary Grant and Deborah Kerr, okay? And a lot of it takes place on an ocean liner. And, you know, the next day you walk into a friggin' classroom, you know, and they're doing long division, you know? And your head is like, I'm with Cary Grant on a boat, you know? Like, get me out of here, you know? I think that's it, you know? And so he was very much, get me out of here, you know? But then he went into this other place. And again, I wrote the book of that question about imagination back there, because so much fed him. That's part of the whole conversation as an artist, is what feeds you. You know, what I was talking about inspiration. And I wanted to, because he's the actual Dylan is a very conservative person in the real sense of the word. He wants to conserve all the things that have fed him, that have nourished him, you know, that made him who he is. So, okay.
Can I ask another question?
Let's do a few others and I'll come back to you,
Yeah.
okay? Yeah, David, of course, sure.
This book didn't come from out of nowhere, obviously. You've written other books where you've explored artists' lives, and so I see this very much as a progression. Would you agree? And tell us a bit about some of the other books I remember you wrote about.
All right, yeah.
Visual artists and
Yeah.
so forth, and you kind of a little bit made up their lives.
Yeah, a little bit made up their lives, yeah. That's a very kind way to put it. Yeah. Well, I've been on this path, you know, for a lifetime. The way you've been on this path for a lifetime, and you know, I think a certain amount of this stuff gets written out of frustration, basically, honestly. You know, I think certainly for me as an artist, one important element is dissatisfaction, which I feel on many fronts about many things, okay? But certainly part of it is about the misunderstanding about art, okay? Which is just so common in terms of people wanting to, they always want to reduce things to a motive or so, you know, like, why'd you do this? You know, like, why are you Bob Dylan? Or, you know. And it has nothing to, you know, it has nothing to do with that. But I've also had this feeling about how much life is imagined. All these things that, you know, people do, that they just imagine that they want to do this, you know, and it isn't necessarily art. You know, a lot in Legends of the Slow Explosion, for instance, I wrote about the peace activist Philip Berrigan. Philip Berrigan did 10 years in federal prisons, okay? 10 years, okay? For trying to destroy, it's a joke, with a hammer, nuclear warheads, okay? 10 years in federal prison, okay? That was an extraordinary act of imagination on his part to me in terms of saying, I'm going to live this life that truly is a Christian pacifist life, and I'm going to show people what that is, you know. To me, that's an act of imagination, you know. And so other people in the book, but also I wanted to write about people's enormous struggles with imagination too, because that's what I read to you some about, which again, I think some people here today could relate to, is trusting yourself, which is just really, really hard, you know. And so one of the people I write about in that book is Miles Davis, okay, who went through some real low points in this world, real low points, you know, and lost belief in himself in ways, you know, and then came back, you know. But that you know, fell again. It's not like it's some, you know, endless ascent, not like that, you know. So to me, the way to approach it was through this legends, basically, because that's imagination, and that feeds us these legends. They tell us something that all the explanations in the world cannot tell us, basically. To me, I think actually certain artists represent legends from whatever you want to call it, the world of inspiration, that then are embodied in this world, okay? And so they're sort of telling us stories through their lives. Certain of the poets are like that. You cannot tell me that Emily Dickinson and Walt Whitman are not legendary figures. They are legendary figures. They're real people, but they're legendary figures too. And so their lives and their art tell us something that way. It's a big topic, David.
Did you want to ask a second?
Yeah, I'm a public school art teacher, was retired, and I found that received digital images have crippled imagination. The digital technology, because the images are there, surrounding us, we're immersed in it constantly, especially young children, that when I'd give an assignment for them to, a free drawing assignment, I would find replications of what the latest cartoon character on TV was.
Right.
And it was a great struggle to get them to break free of these received images.
I believe you. Yeah.
Is there a question? Yeah, please.
Well, I love that you're talking about emotional truth and this, you know, I just love your description. You take me right into that space of imagination. I call it reverie. That's, you know, my term for it. But what I'm wondering is you know, I'm feeling there's some kind of something pure in this space. Does that ring a bell for you?
I didn't catch it all.
Pure about the space?
She really responded to what you said about emotional truth. She calls it reverie, and she feels or suspects maybe there's something pure in that space, and wanted to know how you responded to that idea.
Something pure.
Pure in that emotional truth.
Yeah, I think that's a great word. I think it's true, and I think it's really, really hard to hold on to, and it's really, really hard to honor. And I think that's why some of these people who feel that have a hard time in this world, because that's not, everybody knows that's not what this world is about. So yeah, I think you're right. Yeah.
Baron, could you define legend and legendary? I mean, what makes...
No. I'm just teasing. Say the rest of your question.
What to you is a legend? What makes someone a legend or legendary?
Well, I think this is someone who asked a question who at one point in her life lived in a little island in Ireland. Okay, among people who, that's where they lived, on this island. Okay, and I think the thing is about legend is that in legend there's a dimension of something uncanny. I think that's what legend is. And I think that speaks to us in ways that we could barely articulate about how that moves us, that something's uncanny. And I think everybody here knows that. When they see something that moves them, there's something in it that is just has this uncanny. And also there's with the uncanniness, and maybe it's part of uncanniness, is that you really sense it has nothing to do with time. It's really timeless. It doesn't care about time. So and everything else is so much is about time, and on time and out of time, and current and contemporary and all that. And legendary is not like that. Legendary is really for all time, that way. And I think things that move us, in deep, uncanny ways. It can be all kinds of things, I think, speak like that in terms of, because I mean, obviously there are lots of legends about trees, right here, what's around us, okay? Well, they're timeless, in terms of what they have to say, what they tell us, so to speak. So it's all this conversation, really, all the words relate to one another. Has to do with pure, has to do with embodiment, it all goes together. So I think those are dimensions of it, so to speak, You ask me tomorrow, I'd probably say some different things, but at the moment, that's kind of what comes in there. I know that's what's moved me, is that.
Baron, I want to thank you. You've talked a lot. I want to save your voice. We are going to gather afterwards. Baron has books for sale, but he can accept cash and check. And we have refreshments. That famous seltzer is going to make an appearance. But I really want to thank you. We feel like there's a rhythm to our season, that there are moments where we want just to use the word of the day, to be embodied here at Cold Hollow in different ways. And this was so much more than we expected. We had a feeling for what we wanted today to be, and it's just deeper and more resonant, sort of more capaciously what we wanted it to be than I imagined. So I thank you for that.
Welcome. Welcome.
I'll be in the back pouring seltzer and iced tea and whatnot, and I think the book sale table is set up under...